Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for your time. I'm Representative Cyril Orrs, Merrimack 13, and the guy that you've all been waiting to see all day long. So I finally got here for you. So House Bill 1313. Oh, hang on a second. Let's see where I put it. There we go. This deals with free speech, and we're talking about free speech on the sidewalk at abortion clinics. So, a couple things here I'm just going to point out. This bill upholds constitutional free speech. Buffer zones do not give us opportunities for free speech, of course. Will prevent unnecessary legal challenges and related costs. It follows Supreme Court precedent. Buffer zones, there was a similar buffer zone in Massachusetts that was struck down by the Supreme Court. And let's see, it promotes open dialogue, such as out in front of the State House. And I'll come back to that in a minute. However, whenever I come into the State House on session day, usually the other side of the aisle, if you will, is much more represented than my side of the aisle. And do I care? Well, I guess I care. But would I deny them their right to free speech? Absolutely not. That's what America's all about. Some finer points. This law has never been used since it was passed 11 years ago. Current law requires abortion clinics to request the zone from municipality, the buffer zone. None have. There hasn't been one conviction of a pro-lifer or anyone else that I know of. It's unconstitutional, as I mentioned, the Massachusetts law. That was McGullen versus Coakley, if you want to look it up. I'm sure if you are having trouble sleeping at night, you might find that one interesting. And New Hampshire challenged the constitutionality of the buffer zone in court back in 2017. And the court ruled that the New Hampshire residents lacked standing because the law had never been activated or enforced. And we have seen in some instances, there have been a few college campuses, whatever, where they have eliminated the free speech zones by saying, well, you have your right to free speech, but it's over there. And as a matter of fact, I'll make it easy. For those of you sitting on this side of the room, if you look out the window, those of you sitting on that side of the room would have to get up and see. But up on the hill there is a green marker, and that's a free speech zone. That was a joke, I'm sorry. Okay, so that is my testimony. I'm under the 1 hour I requested by quite a bit, so I'm expecting some kudos there. And I'm open for questions if you have any.
All right, questions to this witness. Representative Birch.
Thank you, Representative. And we have long days here. We appreciate a good sense of humor.
Excellent.
So, let me ask you about your assertion that this is similar to the Massachusetts law that was knocked down by the Supreme Court in the Coakley case. Are you aware, or is it not true, that the language of this law was drafted after the Coakley decision in order to make it fit within the constitutional requirements of the Coakley case?
I am not aware of that. However, that would make good sense. If I was going to draft a law, I would like to look at what the Supreme Court has ruled and try and write the law accordingly. But if you need more in-depth information on that or an in-depth answer, I would refer to the chair. I heard he's got some legal expertise and he could probably fill you in.
I could follow up.
Yes, follow up.
Since I pretty much drafted the current law here in New Hampshire, and I have a legal background, people can consult me if they wish.
Did you
Let me
say
ask
consult or insult?
Let me ask you your question. Let me ask you a question about the State House. First, are you aware that we do have a barrier zone here at the State House, and that's why the people you see when you come into Reps Hall are actually a ways back?
I've walked through a pretty tight crowd more than once, so if there's such a law, I'm not aware of it, and apparently a lot of protesters aren't. But I still appreciate the right that they show up and stand out there and take the time to protest.
And I can agree with you if I could follow up on that.
Sure, one more follow.
Right. Are you aware that the U.S. Supreme Court has a barrier law in effect, that New Hampshire has barrier laws involving voting, that people who have something to say in terms of the First Amendment rights still must be away a certain distance? Would you be in favor of repealing those also? Or is there something particular about women going to health centers that you think causes you concern?
No, I think it's a case of, again, it's free speech. And it's a case of this law's never been used. So why would we put ourselves in a position to have to pay lawyers at probably, 6 minutes in 6-minute segments when, we can just walk away from it and not have to worry about it.
Right.
Two of my kids are attorneys, and I know you guys are just people helping people, but they love to bill in 6-minute increments. So.
Other questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Horgan.
So the existing law provides a fairly small buffer zone directly at the entrance to the facility. So do you, but you're saying that's not enough? They should be allowed to directly confront individuals who are going in to get health care at a facility, and I think all these facilities provide a wide variety of other services aside from abortion. So you I guess you object to not being prevented from impeding someone's progress into a medical facility for their medical care.
So my answer to your question with the question first is, now is that like a bluegrass Kentucky spin you put on that? Or, I mean, you're from the Kentucky area, aren't you? Am I misinterpreting what you're asking?
No. Let's have questions and answers. Questions and answers.
So the answer is, of course not. We're not looking to, restrain or constrain anybody. It's a matter of free speech rights. So.
Right. Next question. Representative Tripp, and then Representative Horgan. If you have a follow-up, you may ask one follow-up, and then Representative Tripp.
Well, do you think we should expand this law to people who wish to protest other medical procedures? Like some people are opposed to psychoactive drugs. Some people are opposed to gender-affirming care. In fact, I think one of those persons just gave me a green card. So you think we should? So do we need to make sure that the right to protest any medical procedure that you personally don't object to? Should that that'll take the bill in the opposite direction from this? But that's something you think we should consider?
Yeah, so in all seriousness, I believe that we should allow people to protest. And as Representative Birch, Representative Birch had mentioned, would we eliminate all barriers? No, I don't think so. I mean, we need some barriers like for protection of our Supreme Court or the executive branch or whatever. But I think this is a more reasonable request.
Right. Representative Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I must admit that I did not read RSA 132, 37 through 40. So could you provide a brief synopsis on what those sections do?
Well, I have, thank you for the question. I have somebody, I'm sure, coming up behind me to testify. At least I think they're here, and they will address that question for you.
All right. Other questions? Representative Tur.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for taking the question. When you say the law has never been used, do you imagine it's possible that the presence of the law is why it's never been used, that people are aware that such zones can be created and therefore are not basically causing that to be done? In other words, keeping this in place in the absence of its use, according to your testimony, is itself useful.
So, yes, thank you for the question. So in trying to control my humor, I say, yes, I agree.
Next, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank
Next,
you.
Kayla Montgomery, please.
Thank you very much.
Push the red by, there you go.
Okay. Even still, I feel very far away. Good afternoon, members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Kayla Montgomery. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood New Hampshire Action Fund and Planned Parenthood Northern New England. We are here to oppose this bill today, House Bill 1313, which is repealing the patient safety zone at reproductive health centers. A lot of you are very familiar with this bill. There's a lot of history with this bill. If you've been on this committee for a number of years, you've heard my testimony before, and you've seen this type of bill happen, this repeal. The latest was in 2022. Then Governor Sununu vetoed this type of bill, saying, quote, "We know of no instance where an individual or group has been harmed by it." So back in 2014, Senate Bill 319 was signed into law, and it was crafted to address public safety concerns of reproductive healthcare providers while balancing First Amendment rights. It allows for a non-mandatory, flexible patient safety zone of up to 25 feet. This flexibility is really necessary because we know that not every reproductive health center in New Hampshire needs this type of patient safety zone. And we know that 25 feet doesn't work for every community, so that's why this flexibility is really important. And I just want to note that over the years since this bill has passed, we have seen that not all buffer zones are unconstitutional under Supreme Court precedent. So why we need the patient safety zone? The original law, like I said, it was made to address the escalation of protest activity at certain health centers. And that certainly has not changed since this law has been on the books. The National Abortion Federation, they collect these statistics. You can go online to their website to see specifics on these statistics. They reflect sustained and consistent violence and harassment. So the need for patient safety zones has not changed since this bill first went into effect. More locally, at our Manchester Health Center, we see the protesters, they do a number of things, and I want to be clear, it's not every day, it's not, it varies week by week, it varies with the weather. If there's extreme weather, we might see less people who's out there, so every day is a little bit different, but in general, we see things like photographing of patients and of staff, attempts to engage in dialogue when a patient or a support person does not want to engage in dialogue. We see attempts to block the driveway, sometimes with a physical object or sometimes with a really large sign. And patients have to wait while the driveway is cleared, or they can't exactly see where they're going, especially with snow piles. There's a lot going on the driveway. And it can be a real public safety issue. Drivers can become distracted and concerned, and we have seen a couple of minor accidents happen at that health center. At Planned Parenthood, of course, we take our job of ensuring the safety of patients and providers extremely seriously. That is our #1 priority. So we do quite a lot to mitigate the harm of what goes on outside of our health centers. We hire private detail for once a week. We talk to the patients in advance. We let them know what to expect, especially if they're arriving on foot, which is a very different experience than if you're arriving in the car. And we work with the Manchester Mayor and with the Manchester Police. We have continued conversations. I've had many conversations with them. The reality is that New Hampshire's providers, and patients, really need even more than what this bill provides. And we're certainly more than willing to have conversations with anyone about how to achieve that. But that said, this bill should not be repealed because it's a really important tool. in the toolkit for public safety. Not the first or the only one, but it's really helpful for health centers and local authorities to use when working together to balance public safety and privacy and, of course, First Amendment rights. And Planned Parenthood, of course, recognizes and supports the right to free speech, peaceful free speech we always have. This law does not remove free speech of any sort. It just increases public safety and privacy. So we would urge you to ITL this bill and maintain a commitment to public safety.
Right, questions for this witness? Representative Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Just curious, a flexible patient safety zone of 25 feet,
Mhm.
would that extend into the roadway?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So it's up to 25 feet. So in some communities, every footprint of the health center is going to look very different. I know we have someone coming from Equality who's speaking as well. And Equality here in Concord has a very different footprint than what we have in Manchester. Manchester, we have a larger parking lot. And so potentially if a buffer zone was needed, it could just be 5 feet around the driveway, whereas maybe a different health center needs 20 feet, but it's whatever works for the community. So that's why the law was built to provide that flexibility for what works with each community and with each footprint.
Other questions? Yes, follow-up?
Thank you. So is there a sign that tells people where they can and cannot stand?
So there's no sign that tells people where they can and cannot stand. I would say that most people understand that they can't block the driveway. Occasionally, we have people that do block the driveway, like I said, with a physical object. And in that case, that's why we have our private security who will go out and talk to people. But there are signs about where people can park, and we have conversations with the patients around that.
Right, Representative Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming and speaking with us. These reproductive health care facilities you're speaking of, are they privately owned?
Yes.
Follow-up, please.
Yes.
Are you aware of any other privately owned businesses that the state of New Hampshire gives this type of treatment to?
Thank you for the question. As we talked about earlier, there's certainly different buffer zone types of things in place. Supreme Court, the New Hampshire State House, voting places, funerals. But I would say that reproductive health care is really the only type of organization where we have seen extreme violence in the past. I'm not saying that we've seen extreme violence in Manchester or in Concord, but we know throughout history we've seen this. We've seen people killed at reproductive health centers. Back in 2015, 3 people were killed in Colorado. It's worth noting that 23 of the most aggressive perpetrators of this clinic violence were in jail under the FACE Act, but they were recently pardoned. So we know this is real. I mean, I think we all know it's real because we've seen headlines. So I would argue that this is a little bit different because it's the government's job to have public safety as well.
Thank you for taking my question.
Other questions? Representative Chur, you have a question?
Thanks, and thanks for taking the question. So in the testimony of the sponsor, we heard that this has never been used. And I'm curious if you could explain what that means in terms of that it's never been used, and why you think that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think Representative Birch made a really good point earlier about, sort of having the law on the books is just really important for knowing it's there. It's a good thing for people to be able to understand. I would say that there's lots of, we knew also when this law was first crafted that there's lots of different steps that you can do. The first step can't necessarily be a buffer zone. And as time has progressed, we've done a lot of things. We have a brand new parking lot in Manchester. We have a new fence, which is really great for public safety because it changed some of the footprint and the congestion, but it's not great for privacy purposes. We have additional signs out there. And I would also just add that, and also we've worked with the new Manchester administration and police. But I would add that the enforcement mechanism is not necessarily all on Planned Parenthood of Northern New England or all on reproductive health care providers. Those are conversations that also need to happen with the Attorney General's office. It's a shared enforcement. And I do think that if this committee feels like there's more that could be done or there's more that could protect reproductive health care providers, that's a conversation that I think, we would be delighted to have. And that's a conversation that I think the Attorney General's office would be interested in if you wanted to talk to them about it.
Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah Anderson, please.
Good afternoon. Chairman and the members of the House Judiciary Committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I am Sarah Anderson, the practice manager at Equality Health Center. I'm here to respectfully ask you to oppose House Bill 1313, which would repeal buffer zones for reproductive health care facilities. At Equality Health Centers, safety is our top priority. And over the years, we have experienced serious incidences, including violating threats, vandalism, and hazardous materials placed in our parking lot. We've invested significantly in security, including cameras, reinforced glass, and specific building improvements. We work closely with the National Abortion Federation security staff, and our volunteer escorts help patients navigate the sidewalk safely, often acting as human buffers to help them enter the building. Every person should be able to obtain and provide health care safely and without fear of harassment or intimidation. Patient safety zones are an important tool that helps ensure patients, staff, and the public can safely enter, exit, and exist around the healthcare facilities. We have seen an increase in protest activity, most notably intimidation tactics such as an anti-choice protester wearing a bulletproof vest and having visible guns on their persons week after week. While we are generally familiar with our local anti-choice protesters, concerns certainly do increase when unfamiliar individuals appear, as they often do. There was a recent arrest of a protester on charges of criminal threatening conduct and simple assault charges last month. We respect the right to free speech without question. We also respect the rights of our patients not having to face intimidation, screaming, etc., and obstruction when they're seeking their legal medical care. As Kayla said, buffer zones in New Hampshire are not mandatory. They are limited discretionary measures that clinics can use to preserve safety while allowing individuals to express the views outside a designated area. So these policies strike a very important balance between accessing the care and the First Amendment rights of the person. Finally, again, Kayla mentioned this, the national data drastically underscores the seriousness of the concerns regarding violence and safety. The National Abortion Federation's 2024 Violence and Disruption Report documents hundreds of incidents of threats and other acts of harms directed at abortion providers and patients in recent years. And so these are the realities that we are up against, and they do reinforce why these safety measures, such as these buffer zones, remain important. On behalf of our patients, your constituents, we do respectfully urge you to oppose House Bill 1313. Thank you.
Questions for this witness? Representative Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I'd like to ask you a question in terms of perhaps humanizing the folks we're talking about. Since you're involved in running one of these healthcare facilities, can you talk about the vulnerability of people coming into a clinic such as yours and what the impact is on vulnerable individuals seeking medical care who may be fairly distraught to start with?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. People seek abortion care I'm going to speak to abortion care because that's ultimately why we have the buffer zone. It's because of that medical care for so many different reasons. And we can't apply value judgment, right, to why somebody's coming in. So we're working with them and trusting that they do know what's best for themselves. When they have to come in and walk through people screaming at them and shoving pictures of actually unrealistic medical photographs. These are all intimidation tactics. And somebody who's already nervous about a medical procedure has to go through that line of people before coming inside. A lot of people come in tears, absolutely in tears, and their support people are in tears because it does not make sense to them that their own private decision has inspired such a response that they've been yelled at and called mommy as they're trying to walk into a building for healthcare. And so it takes a while for them to get themselves together. And what should be just a day of us, focused on their care and their well-being, it's very distracting. Now it becomes about their experience outside, and people also come into abortion care and decision-making with maybe some distress, maybe not distress. There's clarity in decision-making. I think we all can agree that nobody's excited to have an abortion. It's about clarity of decision-making and confidence in decision-making about what they feel like they can do at this time in their life.
I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
All right. Other questions for this witness? Representative Turk.
Thanks. Thanks for taking the question. So from what you just said, my understanding is that you establish buffer zones and that patients are still receiving this type of interaction, even with the attempts to space them out. So I'm wondering if in some way it is their speech that is essentially being documented as causing these interactions to be difficult for people even with this in place.
That certainly is a huge piece of it, is what is verbalized to the patients is an intimidation tactic. The escorts and outside cannot tell anybody what to say or not to say, and we don't do that. The buffer zone, we have our escorts will draw in chalk what the zone is. There is no enforcement. So speaking from personal experience years ago, I don't know who's there now, if we called code enforcement, they would say, we're going to send somebody to drive by, but it's likely we're not going to do anything.
So again, it's similar to the question that I asked earlier. So when we say this law has never been used, what we're really saying is that the enforcement side of it is what's never been used.
We don't have the support beyond our own escorts to enforce the buffer zone. And my understanding is also that in terms of signage, we're not allowed to put signs up. That has to come from the city. And they have not provided signs.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to call on Sam Farrington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Sam Farrington. I represent the city of Rochester. I'm in support of the bill because I don't think that free speech should be limited to a certain area. But I just wanted to give a different perspective on those protesters that we're hearing about. They're not always protesting. They're often praying peacefully, and they're often sidewalk counseling as well. In England, just a couple years ago, a woman was standing on the side of the sidewalk, and she was praying peacefully, not out loud, just in her head. And she was arrested and she was jailed for this. So I don't want New Hampshire becoming England where stuff like that can happen. It's just outrageous. You can look her name up. Mrs. Vaughn was her name, and she was arrested for silently praying outside of an abortion facility. The other story I want to tell is when I was in Baltimore, I was walking, it was in the inner city, and there was a Planned Parenthood. Of course, that's because they're most profitable in the inner city. But I came across a man, and his name was Mark Crosby. And I saw him with a sign, and I could tell that it was him with a picture of his face. And he was brutally beaten 2 years ago when he was standing outside of that abortion facility, and he was praying and he was sidewalk counseling. Sidewalk counseling is when these people stand outside of the abortion facilities and they will give resources, free snacks, free brochures to these women, to these mothers that are walking inside of that building. And they're not protesting, they're just trying to help the mothers understand that they have more options. And in this case in Baltimore, literally right next door to the Planned Parenthood facility was an Options Pregnancy Resource Center, which I thought was pretty cool. So they're literally just trying to direct mothers away from the abortion facility to the pregnancy resource centers just to let them know that they have more options. So for those reasons, for pro-lifers, for peaceful protesters, for peaceful prayers outside of these facilities, I think they should have the ability to do that.
All right. Questions for this witness? Representative Hort.
You mentioned the counseling services, so I guess you're saying there's not just a right to speak within the buffer zone, but there's also a right to offer counseling services out on the sidewalk?
When I say counseling services, they're just letting them know that they have more options.
Okay,
It's
so
not a formal appointment or anything.
all right, so these people don't have so the counselors haven't entered into an agreement to provide services with the people they're counseling, and
No, they're just
Do they-
offering the resources and they're not forcing them to take them. So
so is there any like certification or training or any special expertise that these counselors have to provide these counseling services on the sidewalk or anywhere else?
to pass out snacks and brochures, I don't think so.
All right. Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, Representative Robert Weary, please. Oh, the next bill. Oh, I'm sorry. Beth Scare, please. Yeah, turn on the mic.
Is there a limit on the speaking time or a hard limit?
Well, I guess
I don't wanna
ask
go
you
on all
Be
day.
reasonable, please.
Yeah,
And you know
of
what,
course.
if you have a written statement, you can submit that. I would.
Yeah, try to
it's probably
summarize.
It would be more helpful to us, I think, if you have a written statement, if you submit the written statement and then don't just read it aloud, but tell us, speak to us.
Of course. And I'm Beth Scare from Nashua, and I have much experience on the sidewalk. So if you have questions about what goes on there, I can tell you. I know recently there have been several ambulances coming to Planned Parenthood in Manchester. So I'm glad there are people there to witness what's going on. I'm asking you to vote ought to pass on HB 1313, the Sidewalk Free Speech Act, to repeal the unconstitutional buffer zone law, which allows private abortion businesses to designate up to 25 feet of the public sidewalk and street as no free speech zones. And I wrote a top 10 of myths about the New Hampshire buffer zone law, which I heard from other people that have already spoken. Myth number 10, the ACLU New Hampshire supports buffer zones. In 2019, Gil Bissonnette, legal director for ACLU New Hampshire, said the following about a proposal by New Manchester aldermen to allow businesses in the downtown district to control the sidewalk outside their storefronts. Individuals, of course, have a constitutionally protected right to be in public places. A court would likely view any concern that the presence of individuals and their possessions in public places may make others feel uncomfortable. It's insufficiently compelling to justify an intrusion on one's right to be in a public place, especially where the person being impacted has not committed a crime. The Constitution, of course, does not protect individuals from feeling uncomfortable. And then myth number 9, Ruth Bader Ginsburg supported buffer zones. In 2014, a unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decided that the Massachusetts buffer zone which is almost identical to our buffer zone, is unconstitutional. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was one of those justices. RGB told the AAP it was not a compromise decision, but a good decision to say, yes, you can regulate, but it's speed, so you have to be careful not to go too far. Myth number 8, the state of New Hampshire risks nothing by keeping the law in the books. Believing this law puts the state of New Hampshire on the hook for big money if an abortion facility posts a buffer zone. They've never posted a buffer zone. I have no idea what the previous person was talking about. That would be, that would never happen, because they would immediately have to defend a lawsuit from those who are legally blocked from being present on the public sidewalk. And they would come after the state of New Hampshire for millions of dollars. The state of Massachusetts paid $1.2 million in attorney's fees in 2014 when they lost their buffer zone case. Myth number 7, abortion facility buffer zones are no different than no soliciting zones around polling places. We heard that one. Anyone can stand or sit inside a no soliciting zone around polling place and chat with a friend or call for a ride. The only thing that's restricted is campaigning, but the buffer zone blocks everyone, except for those passing through or the escorts or the clients and the employees. So it's totally different. Myth number 6,
So,
no
you know,
one.
it sounds like you really are sort of reading from
Okay,
the thing.
well, I'm just trying to summarize, but anyway, no one's restricted or inconvenienced by buffer zones. In a quality health center, if they put up that buffer zone, everybody would be standing in front of Gibson's bookstore. The people that they find so offensive would be in front of Gibson's bookstore. Does Gibson's bookstore want that? I don't think so. In Planned Parenthood, it'd be even worse. They'd be standing in front of private homes across the street. Is that fair for them? No. Only myth number 5 is only pro-life people would be blocked from the sidewalk. Everyone would be blocked, except for employees, escort, security, and clients, and people passing through. Everyone is blocked. Myth number 4, buffer zones protect abortion facility staff and clients from violent acts. It doesn't protect anyone. You can, if somebody is bound to commit a violent act, it's not a force field. There's no fence around it. People just walk through. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it's horrible. That guy in Colorado was out of his mind, and he killed some people, and it happens. It's horrible. It happened today in Canada. Myth number 3, abortion facilities need buffer zones to give their clients space. Planned Parenthood and Equality Health Center have very small lots. People who are there to witness and provide help are right up against the front of the buildings. And that's the way they've chosen to run their business. In Lovering Health Center, they had a place like that in Portsmouth. They moved it to Greenland. They have a huge lot. They've admitted that they don't need a buffer zone because they got a huge lot. They've got lots of space. They have no worries. So Planned Parenthood and Equality Health Center could do the same. And myth number 2, clients are being physically blocked. Well, there's the FACE Act. And Kayla Montgomery mentioned the FACE Act. That keeps people from blocking. They can enforce that. You don't need a buffer zone. Okay. And myth number 1, buffer zones are currently in use. And like I said, there are no buffer zones. I don't know what the Equality Health Center person practice manager was talking about. It would be immediately struck down. And I'm hoping that somebody calls a lawyer today to find out what the heck she's talking about. And so I'm just asking you to vote ought to pass and HB1313 repeal this law, which helps no one, protects no one, and is a serious infringement on our God-given and constitutionally protected freedom of speech. Thanks.
Right. Questions for this witness? Representative Horgan.
Myth number 5, you're making reference, and I guess something about if they had a labor dispute with Planned Parenthood, if you had a unionized facility, and I'm ashamed to say I don't even know if their staff are unionized. The question is, does that issue ever actually come up? Has there actually been a Planned Parenthood agency that's had a labor dispute between management and staff, and have they ever, if so, have they ever been prevented from putting a picket like often happens when you have a labor dispute? So
well,
did that actually happen at any time or place? Or
they definitely have had labor disputes. I mean, they were previously not union. Several years ago, they weren't unionized, and they were unionized. They became unionized here in Planned Parenthood, Northern New England. But I don't know that there was ever any kind of picket or anything.
Right. Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Jason Hennessy, please.
Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Jason Hennessy. I'm privileged to be the president for New Hampshire Right to Life, New Hampshire's largest pro-life organization, and I'm here to speak on behalf of supporting HB 1313. So I want to start out with just, I haven't heard anybody actually read what the signs would say per RSA 132.38. So the sign would actually say Reproductive Health Center, Patient Safety Zone, no congregating, patrolling, picketing, or demonstrating between signs. So I've heard some arguments being made here that this is no different from the Supreme Court or from the polling places restrictions, but that's not true, because in those cases the restriction is viewpoint neutral. It doesn't matter which warrant article you're supporting or which candidate you're supporting or not supporting. Ideally, you just can't electioneer within a certain zone. This is not that. The RSA allows employees of private abortion businesses to operate in these zones. What it does is it prevents people who don't agree with them from being in that zone. That is classical viewpoint discrimination. So these are private businesses. As you heard earlier, they are welcome to purchase all the private land that they would like. If they want more space, they can buy it. I mean, it's expensive in New Hampshire, as we all know, but it's still available. But the thing is, this is public property, public sidewalks. And these laws, even though they've never been used, do intimidate pro-lifers. And I'll just give you a personal example. Shortly after the Supreme Court case in 2014 that struck down the Massachusetts buffer zone law, my wife and I and a close friend, we went to go pray as part of 40 Days for Life in front of the Planned Parenthood clinic in Boston. And it was still soon enough that they had the line drawn around of where the buffer zone was. And me just being me, I stood right inside the line because I knew that the law was struck down. And we prayed. We didn't interact with anybody. We just prayed with each other, prayed for the children and for the mothers. And while we were there, some people that I'd never met and that I'd never seen since, they came and they prayed. But they stood outside the line because I'm guessing they didn't know that that line was struck down by the United States Supreme Court. And my point is that even though this law has never been used and the lines have never been, well, I guess some of them have been drawn, but they're not legally enforceable, it's my guess. This is intimidation. This is intimidation to pro-lifers. So some other points, as Representative Farrington mentioned, there are sidewalk advocates, and I just want, he covered that very well. I just want to point out that there are hundreds of women that are helped each year by our pregnancy help centers. And so giving them this opportunity to actually reach the women going to the clinics, just to let them know there's help out there. And a lot of people take advantage of it. As far as I'm aware, there have been no convictions in the 11 years of any pro-lifer in front of any abortion clinic. I could be wrong, but that's my awareness. As far as I'm aware, no buffer zone has actually been applied for in any municipality in New Hampshire. And in terms of intimidation, I just want to bring up something that I believe the previous executive director for Equality Health Center said at a Senate hearing in 2022 on this same bill. She said, "We want the buffer zone. We will be enforcing it if it stays in law. We have to have it." And as far as I'm aware, in the 4 years that since then, it's never been used. So this is an intimidation towards pro-lifers. So I ask you to please support repeal. I also just one or two other points. We were involved in the lawsuit in 2014 to get an injunction on this. It took 3 years. I'm sure there were all sorts of dollars spent in New Hampshire defending this. Unfortunately, we were struck down because of standing, because we couldn't show that anybody actually been harmed yet. But I believe the intimidation is a harm. And in terms of other things, like you've heard, blocking driveways, intimidating people, there are laws that cover that. And those laws are in full effect right now, and they can be used. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Next, Representative Mary Hagan Phillips, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. My name, for the record, is Representative Mary Hacken Phillips. I serve Hanover and Lyme up in Grafton County, and I'm here to speak in opposition to HB 1313. I think we've already heard a lot this morning about how the buffer zones are working, their constitutionality, their flexibility, and how they're unlike the Massachusetts law. I think we've also heard about the balance between our First Amendment freedoms and the right to access healthcare safely and securely. We've heard a lot about people who oppose abortion care and exercise their right either in prayer or protest under their First Amendment freedoms adjacent to the current buffer zone. So I'm here to strongly oppose the repeal. I think we know buffer zones are working. We have them at courthouses and election precincts. We have them in certain spaces of our society because we agree there are certain places in our society that should be free from threats and intimidation. And the current balance we have under New Hampshire law seems to be working. I wanted to speak about the hypothetical scenario of what would happen here in the state of New Hampshire if this repeal were to take place. So if we know the buffer zone creates safety and security, but we're willing to repeal that, the question before this committee is, what is the plan? As I see it, there's really two courses of action. To do nothing, to leave those patients and providers without safety and security, something that is pretty politically risky. We could all fast forward to the hypothetical situation where blockades become regular, physical intimidation and barriers are set up, and more threats and more harassment for these patients and providers. So the other option I see is that the legislature should have a plan to increase and enforce safety and security in the alternative for these patients and providers. So my question would be, are you looking at those alternatives to existing law that would maintain safety and security as well as balance First Amendment freedoms? And have you considered how the repeal and the claim that medical treatment is by profit-seeking providers really affects the state's OBGYN and healthcare providers here in our state? Have you considered how these providers, who are my constituents overwhelmingly, will take this as yet another attack on their profession, pushing them to stop providing both abortion and non-abortion care services here in our state at a time when we're experiencing healthcare provider shortages? So what I'm trying to express is that I don't believe it's politically viable for exercising the proposal before us. For the record, there is no effort, no groundswell of grassroots support by women here in the state who have reproductive age and capabilities asking for this policy change. Instead, the women of New Hampshire are asking for things like affordability of daily household items, more housing options, more childcare options, more affordable healthcare access, and stronger public school funding. We are not asking you to change reproductive healthcare facility buffer zones. Repealing that zone would leave New Hampshire's women and families less safe and less secure when they seek medical treatment. And we know that the governor herself has stated very publicly that she doesn't want to change the law in New Hampshire, and this proposal flies in the face of that message during a very difficult re-election year. So personally, unlike the sponsor, who is a man, I am a woman of reproductive age and capability who would be directly affected by this policy proposal, and I'm very disappointed that I had to take some time today on my day off to drive to Concord to share testimony once again in opposition to repealing the buffer zone, expending my time and resources to fight for my basic right to privacy and to safely access medical treatments that my doctor and I have decided and determined that are the best for my healthcare. Where's the dignity in coming to the legislature and begging it to keep me, to keep women across New Hampshire, and to keep healthcare providers safe? There's no equivalent threat to men or their providers privately, safely accessing their medical treatments without, facing the threats and intimidation that we're contemplating here today. So the very fact that we're discussing this repeal makes me very sad, and I find it very demeaning that I have to continually fight for my rights in a way that no man is forced to do here in the state of New Hampshire. So for all of those reasons, I urge the committee to vote ITL on HB 1313, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Questions for this witness? Representative Birch.
Just a quick one, because I think perhaps you're an attorney, so yes. Is it your understanding of First Amendment law that it doesn't violate First Amendment to have restrictions regarding time, place, and manner?
Thank you for the question, Representative Birch. What I will say is that I understand the First Amendment to be a qualified instead of an absolute right to the to us, to all Americans, which means that there are certain times, certain places, and certain spaces that time, place, and manner. Sorry, thank you. Restrictions that are possible to enforce, so that where one person's rights extend, that does not extend into the other person's freedom. So I think we have struck a very important balance in First Amendment rights, whereas the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is not qualified in the same way.
Other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next, I'm going to call on Robert. I'm sorry, Robert Lawler, I think. Yeah. All right. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Lawless. I'm from Pembroke. I'll keep this short. I don't have a story about someone from England who may or may not have existed, but what I can tell you is that I walk my dog downtown almost every day. And on Fridays, we walk past the health center. I've gotten to know a number of the escorts out there, and I've seen the protesters. Now, there is intimidation that is being used by them in their protesting. Go on down there on Friday 9:30, 10 o'clock. Take a look. The current law, my opinion is the current law is fine. Nobody's rights are being infringed. They can do whatever, they can say what they want from a ways back. And as you've heard, there really isn't any enforcement on this. They've had to call the police a couple of times. I met the gun guy that was recently arrested. I've had conversations with him more than once. He was down there to intimidate, plain and simple. I know you guys wouldn't like it if the other side who's out there holding the signs quietly was in your faces and came wearing plate carriers and with an AR and a chest sling. That would be their free speech, right? But there's a public safety and common sense take that we need to do with this kind of thing. I think the current law is fine. I don't think anything more needs to be done. That's all I have to say.
All right, questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on HB 1313? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on HB 1313.